What's your thoughts about the man in the van?
Do I have to be polite? What the BAR is not is a legislator. And I say that very respectfully, there's some really, really good companies out there, but the barriers to entry are fairly low.
How do we go about that? What do we do? What ideas have you got?
No, when Charles and Diana.
Right, okay. Yeah. This is super valuable. Just movement or anything whatsoever on these 5 p.m. key releases.
So now I knew this one was going to come up.
Abels are the kings, aren't they?
Do you know,
So from then to now, how long have you actually been in the industry for?
oh, blimey. So what, 71 or 53 years?
53 years.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But who did they work for? Was it the Queen? Hi guys, welcome to this month's episode of Movecast. Today we have a very exciting special guest with us, Ian Studd, the Director General of BAR. Really, really cool name as well, by the way.
As I just said to you, your challenge is, should you wish to accept it, come up with something I haven't heard before.
All right.
By the end of the podcast.
Okay. Now, amazing to have you on today.
Great to be here.
What normally happens now is Rob will ask you a business question, then we jump straight into it. Yeah, but thank you for making the journey.
Oh, my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Great to have you on, mate. Great to meet you. So we'll kick it off with a business question like we always do on this podcast. Should be quite a simple one for you, this one. So I'm new to the removal industry. I know nothing about the removal industry. What is BAR?
What is BAR? Well, actually, that sounds a very simple question, but it's quite a complicated one. So the industry is, unfortunately, pretty unregulated. And I say that very respectfully. There's some really, really good companies out there. But the barriers to entry are fairly low. And would you believe, all the way back in 1900, there was a group of like-minded individuals who got together and felt that there ought to be some representation for the industry from the point of view of those delivering the service and, of course, the consumer. So in 1900, the forerunner of the BAR was born. And the ethos of that was that they wanted to be the guardian of professional excellence in the service industry and also the go-to voice of the industry. And here we are 124 years later, and that's still very much what we're about. What the BAR is not is a legislator, but we apply a degree of compliance and regulation that otherwise doesn't particularly exist in the industry. And that's done through a whole range of different things, which I'm sure we'll get into as we get into this conversation.
So is it guidance? Did you guide so I'm a new removal company, I've been going 2 years, 8 staff. Do you provide guidance as well as the badge?
Yes, of course we do. Yes, so there are two elements to BAR membership. There is our criteria of membership, which looks at everything from a fit and proper test on the officers of a business, all the way through its statutory obligations, how it's running its vehicles, how it's running its fleet, how it delivers its administration, training, employment. All BAR members are VAT registered. All BAR members have PAYE schemes, for example, and all of that sits within our criteria of membership. And then alongside that, we run our code of practice, which is run in conjunction with CTSI, the Chartered Trading Standards Institute. And that represents how we perform and behave with our consumers in accordance with the Consumer Rights Act of 2015. And both of those areas of test are mandatory upon all BAR members all of the time. So yes, we provide guidance because not all companies joining us have all of those things in place at the time. So we'll work with them to help them get to the point of being compliant with those things.
Well, that's cool then. So if somebody was to inquire, then you could give them guide. If they don't quite fit the criteria, you can guide them in the right direction, maybe give them contacts, etc., and then get them sorted to get them on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And strangely enough, one of the things we had a team meeting just last week, and we're looking at how we can expand that. Because, and I make no apologies for saying this, what we won't do is compromise on compliance with either one of those two criteria. To become a BAR member, you have to be able to fulfil those. And clearly, not all companies who might aspire to being BAR members can do that on day one. But we do want to work with them, and we're currently looking at how we can expand that kind of consultancy offering.
Yeah.
But even once a company has become a BAR member, there are all kinds of additional benefits then in terms of further consultancy. We offer a fairly comprehensive training program, for example. I'm running a course tomorrow on cost modelling. So, you know, and all of those are we're generally doing online now, so they're free to access for BAR members. We do open them up to non-BAR members, but clearly our focus first and foremost is on helping our members.
That's amazing. Can I just ask, as one of the criteria points, do you have to own a lorry? Do you have to run a lorry, or can you just use vans?
That's a really interesting question. Up until fairly recently, the criteria stated that the measure was an 18-ton removals vehicle.
Yeah.
But the board looked at this probably 8 or 10 years ago now, because nowhere, unless I'm wrong, nowhere in the laws of this country does it say that you have to have an 18-ton vehicle to be a removals company. So we did review that part of the criteria, and so no is the answer to the question. If you're running 3.5-ton vans, 5-ton vans, that's perfectly fine. The measure is really about how you maintain, how you run them, rather than the vehicle itself.
Yeah, nice. I only ask that because there's probably a lot of companies out there that don't have a lorry that may think that way, that they can't even get in touch until they've got a lorry.
You know, we see this conversation all the time, don't we, about man and van.
Yeah.
You know, well, it's not the van and it's not the man, it's how they work and how they deliver the service that's the key issue for us.
Yeah.
So it's measuring the professionalism and the output and the consumer protections and all of that kind of thing, rather than the fact that it's a 3.5-ton van.
Yeah.
You know, we all have to start somewhere.
Of course, yeah.
And no businesses, to my knowledge, start with having a fleet of, 15 or 20 18-ton removals vehicles. You build up to that stuff. Yeah. And very much part of what we're about is helping companies to grow and develop. So that change was made a number of years ago, and we actually have quite a number of BAR member companies now who don't run 18-ton vehicles. I mean, quite apart from anything else, some of the access issues going into town, the clean air zones, all of that kind of stuff, just mean that running smaller vehicle on their fleets just becomes a more efficient way of doing business more often.
Yeah.
So have you got any man in the van members?
No. We have professional moving companies who use 3.5-ton vehicles and employ their men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the
So
same thing.
what's your thoughts about the man in the van?
Do I have to be polite?
No.
So
speak your mind.
Right. So I'll repeat what I said a moment ago. There are some hugely impressive professional companies out there who run smaller vehicles and employ 3 or 4 men, whatever that might be. I have no issue with that. Where I have an issue is with the black market privateers, buccaneers, pirates, call them whatever you will, who are stealing business from you, from me. They're cheating the customer, they're cheating the government of much needed taxation revenues. It's unfair competition, and they are not providing a professional service, because first and foremost, what we are is a profession. We're a trade, and we need to sell ourselves that way, and we need for the competition to be measured in that way.
Yeah.
So these guys that come in, take a buck, disappear again, are absolutely not right for our industry.
Yeah.
That's where I have my issue.
So I guess a lot of your conversations and moving forward points are, how do we go about that? What do we do? What ideas have you got?
So one of the things that I do in my role as Director General, I'll repeat what I said a moment ago, the BAR has a vision of being the go-to voice for the moving industry. And I say that very respectfully and very proudly, because I think we are that. I spend a good deal of my time in conversation with regulators, legislators, government departments, across the whole gambit. And we make this point constantly about the fact that our industry needs to be viewed as a profession, as a trade in its own right, and that there have to be some barriers to entry for new starters. And that isn't about the size of the van, that isn't about how many people they employ, it is about making sure that they are running their businesses professionally, ethically and responsibly. So we sit on a number of different committees working with government bodies, talking about the needs of our industry. We have regular meetings with different government departments, so Department for Business and Trade, with the Home Office, with Department for Levelling Up. We also meet with DVSA on a regular basis, with the Traffic Commissioner, all of which is about, first and foremost, talking about the BAR, because I can quantify what we're talking about when I talk about BAR members. But inevitably, those conversations are also about the wider industry, because BAR member or non-BAR member, professional moving companies all have the same issues.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about isn't exclusive to our members.
Yeah.
So we're constantly representing what we think are the needs of the industry. And it's quite interesting in that my job takes me to quite a lot of conferences around the world. You know, in Europe, I was in Australia a couple of years ago. They're exactly the same issues. They have exactly the same issues that we have in this country.
Yeah.
So we're not alone in the fact that we're all pushing for greater recognition and understanding of what we're about as an industry.
So do you have meetings with other associations around around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I also do is I sit on the board of FEDIMAC, which is the European Federation of Moving Associations. And so there's an interesting thing. So the board of FEDIMAC is made up, is chaired by a Belgian. It has a Spaniard, a Romanian, a Bulgarian, a Latvian, and me. Oh, and an Italian.
Sounds like FIFA.
And the meetings are conducted in English, so it's quite interesting. But seriously, we and particularly since Brexit, for us to have contact and direct contact with our colleagues across Europe is actually really important.
Yeah.
Because we don't form part of that group anymore. So by having that relationship with FEDIMAC, we're also aware of what's happening within the member states within Europe. And as I said, you know, not surprisingly, perhaps much of what's happening there, much of the challenges in those countries replicates what's happening here. We all have issues around, net zero. We all have issues around decarbonisation, around planning, around growth, all of those things.
Are you liaising with the government for net zero and stuff, and how?
Yeah. So yes, we are. One of the discussions that we have regularly is that the pace of change is going to be different for different industries. And again, I say this advisedly and respectfully, the focus from government has largely been on the big logistics businesses, on transiting stuff up and down motorways, rather than what happens, with Mrs. Smith moving from Acacia Avenue to Oak Close. Yeah. So we're having those conversations all the time. And also when I say the pace of change, so if you look at the Eddie Stobarts of this world, their rollout and replacement program is going to be every 2-3 years maybe. Yeah. You look at the average life cycle of a truck in the moving industry, it's anywhere between 10 and 15 years. And so that replacement program and engaging with alternate fuels, whether that's electric, hydrogen or whatever, is a much longer burn. Yeah. And quite apart from anything else, the margins involved are a significant consideration, and the availability of those technologies is also a significant consideration. So we're having those conversations all of the time. One of the things, again, just while it's in my head, because I'm getting very old and I forget these things, just on that, the proliferation of clean air zones around the UK now, in all the cities around the UK, we publish an update for BAR members every single month. On the first of every month, there's an update in terms of which cities are involved, what are the qualifying criteria, what are the penalties, what are the queues. Yeah. Because if you're, again, preparing your quotation to move Mrs. Smith from, London to Sheffield, then within that cost build-up needs to be a consideration around any possible implications on clean air charges.
Yeah.
So we update those.
They're quite expensive these days.
Yeah.
I think the easy way to cut it out, or not so easy, is just to get a new vehicle. And that's what I think. That's because I spoke to you about this. Then
absolutely, but then we're back into that discussion about the life cycle of a removals vehicle. So many operators will have bought a Euro 5 truck a number of years ago, expecting it to have a 10 or 15 year life cycle, and bought it in all true faith, all good value. Yeah. And suddenly, it doesn't comply. One of the other things that we're constantly doing, again with central government and with the boroughs and devolved governments, is contesting that there should be an exemption for removals vehicles because we don't have a choice
Yeah.
around where we're going to go. And then, again, there's a whole number of things. If I was being really cynical, we go into a clean air zone, and for 80% of the time that we're there, the truck is parked at the side of the road with the engine turned off. So how is that polluting anything?
Yeah.
And again, in differently to other industries and businesses, where a distribution company, a retail company, might be able to aggregate those charges across 30, 40, 50, 100 clients, poor old Mrs. Smith has got to pay for all of it.
Yeah.
So ultimately it's causing consumer detriment as well. So we're having those conversations all of the time. One of the challenges there is that although it's a central government policy around cleaning up the air in our cities, and I don't think any of us would argue that that's a good thing to do, they've devolved the implementation of that down to the individual boroughs. Yeah. So you can't have one conversation. I think there's about 27 or 28 cities and boroughs that now have clean air zones. So we're having 28 different conversations because each one has its own scheme. Yeah. But that's the kind of stuff that we do all of the time.
I suppose we just need more of those protesters on Instagram and TikTok that are just cutting them down.
Well, I'm not sure that works, but there you go.
But I suppose, carry on, Rob.
No, I was just going to kick it back. If you got, I was going to kick it back to Mr. Studley's childhood.
Yeah.
Series of growing up, because that was a good answer. What is bar? You've just answered.
Yeah.
Well, but that's sorry, just to rattle on that. That's part of it because we've also got our packaging service, BAR Services. That's been around since the 70s. So we are a provider of packing materials to the industry. We have our quality service standards business, which installs and audits quality standards, whether they be BSIs, BSENs, ISOs, that kind of stuff. And when we talk about compliance checking, QSS, Quality Service Standards, also provides the team of inspectors that conduct the annual inspection programs for our membership. And so here's a stat for you. Between that team of inspectors, they do 1,100 inspection visits a year.
Wow.
So it's pretty significant. And that's split between the BAR inspection criteria and the quality standards that it inspects and audits. So it's not insignificant.
Who inspects you?
Who inspects me? The board of directors. All of the time, yeah. I am answerable to the board of directors. And do you know what? I love it. I have a great relationship with them. The president will tell you, I pester him. I almost haunt him because I'm on the phone to him 3 or 4 times a week. We're constantly chatting about what's going on. But I have a great relationship with the board, and I am answerable to them.
Just before we jumped on, you told us that next year is your last year.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to switch off, or are you still?
That's a really interesting question. So I've been in the industry 50 odd years now, and by the time I retire next September, I would have been in this job for 10 years. And I've loved every minute of it, I really have. But there is a point in time where it's naturally right to move on. The time is right for me to hand over to somebody else. Will I switch off? Not altogether. No, I've got things that I want to get on with. I've got things that I want to do in my personal life. But I've also, in my head, I will still do something. I don't know what something is, but it won't be travelling around the world as I do at the moment.
Well, I asked that because you seem so passionate still.
I am.
You still want to be involved, I feel.
Yeah. This industry has been really good to me. It's the only industry I've ever worked in. And I suppose in a way I'm a bit of a classic example of the fact that you start life as a porter, and I did, and you end up as the DG of the BAR. How on earth does that happen? There is this amazing career opportunities that you can't necessarily see. Yeah. And that some of it is undoubtedly by accident rather than choice.
So being a porter, how did you get into the porter? So growing up?
So I was I grew up in Lincolnshire, a town called Stamford in Lincolnshire, and my dad was a removals man. He was a driver, worked for a company in Stamford, and in 1971 he decided to have a go for himself. and of course he couldn't afford to employ anybody, so I was 13 years old and I became a porter.
Classic, yeah.
And I've literally been in the industry ever since. So, you know,
What was that business called?
that was called GTS Light Haulage and Removals, Stamford, Lincolnshire, 2232.
Is it still going?
No.
No. Did it
It's,
get sold on or?
It's a whole different, you know, family businesses are difficult things.
Yeah.
And by the end of the 70s, sort of 1980ish, he and I weren't getting on well. My brother was in the business, my uncle was in the business. Something needed to give, so I moved off and I joined Abel's up in Norfolk as a driver. And Dad's business then got split up between my brother and my uncle, and all of that ran along for another 5-10 years or whatever, but it's pretty much all gone now.
Abel's are the kings, aren't they?
Do you know, I was there for just under 14 years, I think, and I loved it.
Yeah,
That's
you know,
so phenomenal.
because I see a lot of removal companies on Instagram, social media, and they always like their social media. They're a real classy.
They always
Yeah.
always
company,
have been,
I
in my
find,
experience.
yeah.
You know, they were really, really high profile, top end
Yeah,
marketplace,
they seem that way.
which demanded a certain image, and by God, that image was
Yeah.
maintained and fulfilled.
Yeah.
And here's an example of just that, and just how, I want to say rigid, but that's not quite the right word. But so I hadn't been there very long, and I was a driver, and it was an absolute rule that every time you came back to the yard, you had to wash the truck. And at that time, there was a rickety old truck wash at the bottom of the yard. You know, the two big brushes, and you'd drive through it, and the brushes used to miss more than they hit. You know, they'd bounce all over the truck. But you'd do that every time. But then every Saturday, there'd be a rota for drivers, and if you were on the rota, you'd come in on the Saturday, three drivers, whatever, and maybe 4 or 5 of the kids from the local town, and you'd wash every single vehicle in the yard. Okay, and well, it was a challenge, but that was how it was. And my very first time of doing this, and I'd only been in the company for a month or two, not long, and I'll never forget it. We're having to hand wash most of these lorries because the wash itself was pretty rubbish. It was pouring down with rain, and the owner of the company, at some point during the morning, came into the yard in his Range Rover, came down to where we were washing the truck, got out of the car and gave me the biggest roasting because I wasn't wearing my tie.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Company uniform, that's how it was, you know.
Even on van wash days?
Even on van wash days.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. But do you know what? It's
Next
one of those
level.
things you just kind of get into the
Yeah,
habit of
yeah.
doing it, and it was who we were, it was what we did, it was how we presented ourselves, and it was enormously successful.
How did they get the royal emblem?
So there was
Because them standards, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what
Part-
that's
partly
part of
But
it.
who did they work for? Was it the Queen?
no, when Charles and Diana
Right.
got
Okay.
married,
Yeah.
they were engaged to do some moving for them, and it kind of came out of that. But you know, again, this industry throws up all kinds of opportunities and you know, great experiences. And one of my great experiences is having been involved in a number of different moves for different members of the royal family, the royal household itself, which is a massive institution. And I've got, you know, memorabilia from that stuff
Okay,
at
cool.
home
Yeah.
to this day, and I'll always look back on it with real pride.
So how would one go about like moving the Queen? Would the Queen's representative come to you? Would they come to the Bar Association, or not you specifically,
me,
but just to
no.
make sure that everything's
No, there
in
were so at the time, you know, Abel's, the board of Abel's had very strong ties, very strong relationships with the institution that is the royal household.
Okay,
So
yeah.
you're not engaging necessarily with the individual, you're engaging with the household, and different services require different skills and so on, and different practitioners. So we got involved in that way, and we did, and they still do, but we did in my time moves for a number of members of the royal family. But I suppose one of the ones that sticks in my mind the most was actually one done for the royal household rather than a member of the royal family, and that was moving Prince Charles's office from St James's Palace into Buckingham Palace, and then the Lord Chamberlain's office was going the other way. And we were on site there for probably the best part of a couple of weeks. We were living in the barracks, we were eating our meals in the palaces and so on. Just a wonderful experience. And there's only this industry
Yeah,
can really give you those opportunities.
of course, yeah.
You know, different places to go, different people to meet. It's just, I've loved it.
One of my favourite photos in the removals industry is that photo of Abel's. I think they had to use like an airstrip. Do you know which one I'm on about?
I have a photo in my office of exactly that,
Yeah.
with me standing in front of the truck I was driving at the time.
Really? So
That
you're
was
on
in-
that photo?
That was in 1984.
There's arguments that that's photoshopped.
No. I can assure you. So the business at that time was based in a town called Watton, up in Norfolk, and literally across the road from where the yard and the offices were was the old RAF camp, RAF Watton.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the exact circumstance. I think it was something like a family day or whatever. In fact, I'm sure it was. But that was a Sunday, and we literally took every vehicle on the fleet, which was probably in excess of 100 vehicles at the time, and parked them all the way down the runway for this Photoshop. It was brilliant.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
That really is.
But I have a photo in my office of me standing in front of my truck, 1984, in my Abel's uniform with tie.
But I'm a big thing that I like manifesting stuff.
Yeah.
And I actually had that photo as my screensaver on my phone for a while.
You
Not
sent,
anymore,
you
'cause
sent
I
me
just-
that about 5 years ago. That's
Yeah.
a photo.
I
So-
realised it's out of reach. So
On my-
put the family back on.
not dissimilar. On my laptop, my screensaver is in 2019 at our annual conference in Stratford-on-Avon. I managed to get, it took an awful lot of doing, but I managed to get permission to close the town centre roads on a Saturday lunchtime, and we did a parade of vintage vehicles, so everything from horse and cart
Yeah.
at the front end through, vehicles of the 20s, 30s, 40s, right the way through to the modern day Pantechnicons.
Wow.
And it was just an amazing experience, and that photo is my screensaver to this day. I love it.
Amazing.
Yeah. I just look at that and I think that's what our industry is.
So do you still speak to Abel's now?
Yeah.
You're still in touch.
There's people who work at Abel's who were there when I was there. In
Okay.
fact, we were running a transport manager refresher course, a 2-day refresher course in Watford. We do it quite regularly, but this was last year. And one of the guys who was on that course was my porter from 1984.
Wow.
Yeah.
Deal.
So he's now the transport manager.
Did he pass?
At Abel's. Yes, he did. Yeah, good guy.
You really are married to the game, aren't you?
Yeah.
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 So you started in the industry at 13.
Yeah.
When did your dad start in the industry?
That's a good question. So that was 71. He'd probably been in the industry. He'd probably been a driver packer for, 10 or 15 years maybe prior to that.
So this is all you've ever known then?
It's all I
Yeah, it's all you've ever been brought up with.
Yeah.
And you literally have worked your way up
Yeah.
right to the top.
Well, whether it's the top or not, I don't know. But that's what I said. The industry has some terrific career pathways, but we don't see them. We don't necessarily understand them.
Yeah.
But they're there. And if you're prepared to stick your head over the parapet,
Yeah. Put in
then
the work.
Yeah.
Just back to BAR. One of the things I'm immensely proud of is that we are constantly developing and upgrading and defining what our training offering is. And I think we have a really, really good training platform. But what has been lacking is the thing that joins it all together, that can start to describe what is available and how you can go about doing it. And a number of years ago, the government changed its approach to delivering apprenticeship schemes here in the UK. And this thing called Trailblazer was born. I think it went live in 2017, I think it was. And we, the BAR, got engaged with the development of those programs back in 2015. And at that time, we said we wanted our own apprenticeship programs. And we were told by the Department for Education at the time, you're not big enough. You need to join the logistics industry and create programs there, which we did. Yeah. But those apprenticeship programs have never really been fit for purpose. And a couple of years ago, I finally managed to get the Secretary of State for Transport, who at the time was Grant Shapps, to agree that the moving industry is not part of the logistics industry, and therefore we needed to have our own programs. So on the back of that, we've created what's called a level 2 apprenticeship standard for a removals operative, a bespoke standard.
Yeah.
That has now been approved. So that's the gateway into the industry. And then we've created what we're calling the BAR Academy, which shows how the career path can go from there to being a driver or a warehouseman or a transport operator or customer service or sales. There's a whole different range of apprenticeship programs that can now be linked together. So we formally launched that at conference in Glasgow this year. And at Movers and Storers Show, we'll be taking a stand to promote purely that.
Are you there this year?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. So, and I'll just emphasise that although the BAR, working with others in the industry, has created this programme, it's not exclusively for BAR members. It's a standard, it's a scheme that's available to anybody.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose it has to be, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, yeah.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm really, really proud of that, really pleased with that, and I think it's something we've needed for a long time.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Whilst we're talking about this kind of stuff, obviously that's more aimed at the younger people trying to get into the industry. I see a lot of things on the forums that people are really struggling for younger lads now and women to want to go away from a Monday to a Friday. They're not interested.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
It is very difficult, and again, forgive me, but if I speak about my experience, which is very different to where we are now. So back in the early 80s, when Elaine and I were first married and we got a young family, as the single income family, I wanted every hour that I could get. I wanted all of the additional benefits, so overnight allowance. I did as much of that as I could possibly get my hands on. And to an extent, the way employment contracts were shaped at that time was to encourage you to want that stuff. So the basic hourly rate might not have been the best, but with overtime and with nights out and all of that stuff, you could earn a decent wage.
Yeah.
The reality of today is that most families are not single income families. There's usually two salaries coming into the household. So that dependency upon all of the overtime and all that stuff isn't anywhere near what it was.
Yeah.
So we need to recognise that, and we need to shape contracts of employment in the way that meets with the expectation. And I'm not saying we just give away everything, but if we truly want to attract new talent, then we've got to think about what it is we're doing. And part of that is about money, as always.
Of course, yeah.
But part of it is about what's in it for me.
Yeah.
So if I
career
come
path,
and work for
innit?
you,
Yeah, it's a
what
career
are you going to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of that requires us then to think about how we deliver the job.
Yeah.
Because if we've got staff that only want to work, say, 45 hours a week, then how we price and how we deliver needs to reflect that. So how are we going to fulfil a job? Are we going to keep people out working till 9 or 10 o'clock at night? Probably not. So we need to think about how we say.
Have you ever took a apprenticeship on?
No,
Have you
I
tried
have
any
been
schemes or
approached.
anything like that?
No, I have been approached, but it's just never materialised. But I'm open to it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So just to pick you up, Warren, on something you said a minute ago, the apprenticeship, and invariably we all tend to think that it's for an apprentice is the spotty 16-year-old who's just out of school.
Yeah.
The academy program that we're talking about is open to anybody. So if you've got somebody in your business who is upskilling or changing path, there is almost inevitably a scheme there that can help.
Okay.
So if you've got somebody moving from being a driver, who is now going to come into the transport office or run the warehouse for you or move into sales, all of the things that happen all of the time in our industry, these programs of upskilling are there and available.
Okay.
And depending where you are in the UK, are to an extent funded. So here in England, apprenticeship schemes are funded. In the devolved areas, sadly they're not. And that's another battle that we're having with government, because we really need to have one solution.
Yeah. That's amazing. I didn't realise that. And
Yeah.
like you said, this isn't open just to BAR members.
Oh,
it's
no,
open
no,
to
no.
everybody.
No. So when the rules around creating an apprenticeship standard are that it has to be led by an employer group. The development of the standard has to be led by an employer group. It can't be me.
Yeah.
I can certainly help, I can facilitate, I can provide guidance, all of that stuff. But actually, it's the employers themselves who have to knit it all together and say, this is what we want. So that employer group was formed, as I said, 2 years ago, and included BAR members, non-BAR members. It included representation from some of the other trade groups that exist in the industry. So it's been developed for the industry. We've just led the process.
Cool, man. You go.
Do you have any movement or anything whatsoever on these 5 p.m. key releases?
So now that I knew this one was going to come up. So it is a pain.
Yeah.
It's the bane of our industry.
If
But
anybody, it's BAR. You've got the force there.
We are constantly pushing that button, pressing that button. So there is 5 years ago, 6 years ago, a body of people came together which is known as the Home Buying and Selling Group. And that represents everybody from the Law Society, the Chartered Surveyors, conveyancers, government, us. And the aim of that group is to improve on the experience for the consumer. Because the challenges for getting key release, ultimately that's the end result, isn't it? But the challenges of engaging with the home buying and selling process here, particularly in England, are challenging and somewhat archaic, to say the least. So 5, 6 years ago, this group was formed with that intention. And there are, I think, about 160 different businesses or representative bodies that are involved in the group. But predominantly, there's maybe 25 to 30 that drive on change, that encourage, develop, and ultimately, hopefully, implement change. And we're one of those. Now, we did some really good work together during COVID to get the market open and up and running again. But this issue of getting some sense of finality and certainty around completion day is an ongoing challenge. What I can tell you is that we are engaged in all of those conversations, and every time we sit down with the group, we have this conversation about what on earth are you doing about this. It is now a key strategic objective of the group that we have to aim at having key release by 1 o'clock on completion day. And the group has created some informational material that goes out to everybody in the group and can also go out to consumers and is on the BAR website, around educating people as to why that can't happen or why that should happen. Now, what we don't always see is, as an industry, and again, I'm going to choose my words really, really carefully here because I don't want to sound disrespectful to anybody. But you see it on the various Facebook groups all the time. It's the solicitors. Well, sometimes it is. Quite often it's not. So in that process of buying and selling houses and getting to the point of exchange, there's something like 40 to 50 individual agencies involved in arriving at that outcome. And not surprisingly, it's not all joined up all of the time. Some of it is, and a growing portion of it is around the transfer of funds to do with anti-money laundering, compliance issues and all that kind of stuff. But none of it is insurmountable. It's a process of education. We all need to know what we've got to do, by when, so that can happen at a given point in time. What I would say is certainly improving is, one, there is a recognition from all of those parties who are involved in that group that this is an issue and it needs to get resolved. And secondly, when the group was first set up, although government was involved not quite as a bystander, but government says industry needs to sort its own problems out. So we're here to listen and not necessarily get engaged. For some of this stuff to happen, it needs government to get engaged, and it needs some of the regulations to be changed. They are now making noises that they're doing that. So that is definitely improving. And again, this isn't an excuse, it's a fact. What hasn't helped is the chaos that we've seen in government circles in the last 2 or 3 years. So we've had 5 different housing ministers in the last couple of years. And although the civil servants who are generally the ones doing the work are largely the same people, every time somebody new comes and sits at the top man's or top lady's desk, everything goes on hold and you wait to see what the new minister's priorities are going to be.
Okay.
So we end up having the same conversations again and again and again. So definitely progress being made. And also, it's not just around what we do, obviously. The whole process of how information is captured and managed during this buying and selling of a house is, I used the word a few minutes ago, it's archaic. So at the moment, currently a buyer or a seller has probably got to produce evidence of proof of identity on at least 4 or 5 different occasions. Well, why can't you just do that once?
Yeah.
Why can't it be a digital transaction?
I think the introduction of software has sped it up a lot, don't
Yes,
you think?
and we have instances in other countries, in Australia, for example, where the whole conveyancing process is done and dusted within a matter of days.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
And some of that is software driven, and some of those softwares are being actively looked at by government now and are being tested. So I do think the solutions are along the way. But we've continued to sit in on all of these meetings. We continue to bang the drum. Does change happen fast enough? No, it doesn't. But if we're not there, and I say this very respectfully, if we're not there at these tables shouting and making the noise, nobody else is.
No.
So we're doing our level best here, and we'll continue to do so. And again, that's an industry outcome, not a BAR outcome, as most of the conversations that we have with government are.
Yeah. So when it comes to this kind of stuff then, do you think, so like you mentioned then, it's been 5 years, it's changed hands, and then you have the same conversations. Do you think we're actually going to get there eventually?
I do. I genuinely do, because I have seen a fundamental change in the attitudes and approach of the people that sit on that group to the noises that we're making.
Yeah.
It's not, it's kind of gone, well, we can't do that because, and, not quite tough, you just got to get on with it. But actually, yes, we can see that's a problem, but it's much further down the line. We need to do these things first. I've constantly said and continue to say, going back to what I mentioned a moment ago, that the strapline for the group is to improve on the experience of the consumer. So to do that, we've got to go to the end point and work backwards. So the end point is that Mrs. Smith has got the keys to her new home and can move in. That's the end point. So how do we deliver that with a degree of certainty? And bearing in mind, and again I make this point all of the time, this isn't a new issue. All the way back in the 70s, we had issues of late key release. We did. We did. It's a bigger issue now, and it's largely a bigger issue because compliance testing and the need for compliance testing is much, much more involved now than ever it was in the past. And whilst technology, Rob, you'll know this better than me, whilst technology is supposed to solve all of these problems, it actually creates a whole realm of other challenges and issues. Data transfer, GDPR, all of that kind of stuff, which didn't really exist back in the day. So it's not a new issue, but it's the same issue, but in a much different and a much more involved way. But I do genuinely think we are making progress, and I do genuinely think we will get a solution.
Well, what do you reckon is the biggest contributor to waiting? What's the biggest?
I think there's a whole number of things. Bear in mind, I've just moved house myself fairly recently.
What time did you get the keys?
About 2 o'clock. Just at 2 o'clock.
That's a lovely time.
Yeah.
Just enough time for lunch, isn't it? That?
In my own experience, and I accept that this isn't necessarily the norm, but and not because it was me, by the way, but in my own experience, completion day wasn't the issue. That was all pretty straightforward. But the build-up between exchange and completion was fairly chaotic. We had a number of different dates which fell apart for different reasons. And one of the things, again, I talked to the group about relative to that, improving the experience, the lack of information coming back from the conveyancers and the solicitors was appalling. No doubt about that. So, believe me, I'll be shouting about that. But completion day itself was actually pretty straightforward.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one, so back to your issue, there's a whole number of different things. Some of it is to do with conveyancing, some of it's to do with land registry. We've got to stop blaming COVID, but it's an absolute fact that COVID added to the delays between sold subject to contract and getting to completion, because people were working from home, some still are. That creates issues around data transfer. Can you send something to a home PC? Can you control that information and all that kind of stuff? So that created some additional challenges. Money laundering, anti-money laundering considerations I mentioned a moment ago, educating the consumer. So if you say to, again, poor old Mrs. Smith, who seems to move all the time, cleared funds need to be in the account of the solicitor by midday on Tuesday. It's no good thinking at 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, I'll press the button and send £300,000, £400,000. You can't.
No.
So that's a transaction that might need to take a week.
Yeah.
So part of it is also about educating the consumer. So there isn't one simple answer that fixes the problem. It's a whole range of different things. And one of the other things the group is working on is this much wider concept of digitisation. So creating property logbooks where much of the information is already stored and it just simply passes along to the next owner. It becomes much more transactional.
Because I noticed a difference from when I moved house like 20 years ago to when I moved house 5 years ago. The difference for me, the speed was the software, because you put all your details in, and then everyone kind of did their next step on the dedicated software that they
guides you through.
Yeah, rather than wherever it was before, it was sign.
And again, that's very much in sync with what's happening in other parts of the world. We just need to engage with it. And of course, we have different approaches in Scotland. We have slightly different approaches in Northern Ireland and Wales. And yet we are one property market largely, because moving across border isn't an issue, is it?
So what are the other countries doing? Are they waiting for keys?
No, they still have those challenges, but just for slightly different reasons and in slightly different ways. So it's by no means an issue that's exclusive to England.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
We've been introducing iMove, the software, to Australia recently.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a CRM. It can work anywhere in the world. So some Australian companies have got involved, haven't they?
Yeah.
So I've been doing Zoom calls, showing them the ropes, and they didn't know what a keyweight was.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't, because the process and the software and the approach that they have there, as I said a little while ago, means that the conveyancing thing is done and dusted in a week or so.
They have the keys on the day.
Yeah. And to the point, I sat in on a seminar. It's probably 18 months ago now, in London, where a senior conveyancer who practices trade in Australia was over talking about those processes. And we talked about the challenges of completion day and not quite knowing when you're going to get the keys and all of that stuff. And he said, and I always remember this, he said that in Australia, not only can the consumer choose the day, they can choose the time of day. Okay. I want to have my keys at 11 o'clock.
See, that's where we need to be, isn't it?
And I genuinely think we will get there, or somewhere near to there.
Yeah.
But the solution isn't about taking the solicitors out and hanging them from the nearest lamppost.
No.
That's part of
And I've heard other removal companies, ones that have been in the game for a long time, on different podcasts, and people air their views.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a thing out there, let's all go on strike, let's all choose the busiest day of the year, and let's all don't do moves. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't see that serves any purpose whatsoever. I kind of understand the logic, but I don't think it solves anything. I think we're much better to work collaboratively with these institutions, with these organisations, with government towards change.
Yeah.
I think if we do anything else, who's getting hit? The consumer is getting hit if we don't deliver the service.
Yeah.
And I think we show our industry in a very poor light if we do that.
Yeah.
My view, I fully accept that others will have a completely different view.
It'd be pretty hard because people would just rent vans and do it themselves.
People would just do it anyway. I'd say 5% of the industry would actually strike, and it wouldn't resolve anything, probably.
It wouldn't.
So what are your thoughts on these people that say BAR is an old man's club?
That old chestnut, yes. So Interesting. So I think there might be an argument to say that, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it might have been more that.
Yeah.
It absolutely is not now. It's a very open association. We're a not-for-profit association. We've got just under 400 members that operate out of 500 or so sites around the UK. The company, the association is owned by its members, so it's not my business, it is their business. The association appoints and elects its board of directors, and those directors come from member businesses.
Yeah.
And there is a very open election process, so there is change every year at the board. Some new faces come along. Governance protocols allow that to happen. So the members are represented in the best way that they can. And that also then feeds down through our regional meetings, our area meetings. So there is always that conduit from the member to the board, from the board to the member. And then my role is to deliver the strategy of the board. It's as simple as that. So it's a business that belongs to its members, and we go in the direction of travel that they want us to go in through their elected officers. And it's very inclusive these days. We talked right at the start about, do you need to have an 18-ton truck to be a removal? No, you don't.
No.
So that whole approach has changed and softened over the years. But what doesn't change and what doesn't soften, and I'm really, really glad about this, is that the criteria of membership and the code of practice are rigid. They are non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And those are tested physically at every member site every year.
Have you guys got a sales team? Do you actively look, or is it more word of mouth now?
So we have, you mean the BAR?
The BAR, yeah.
So how many of us do you think there are?
I'm going to guess at 30.
Okay, you're close. There's 10, of which 4 are part-time.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say about 10, yeah.
And we manage every aspect of output, whether that be training, whether that be our regional meetings, our compliance regimes, conference, we deliver it all ourselves, we do all of that work ourselves. So we have what's called our membership services team, and the clue is on the tin, they are there to support member services.
Yeah.
And part of what they do as well is to proactively explore who we think might benefit from being a BAR member and who we think the BAR might benefit from having in membership.
Yeah.
Again, I think I said right at the start, the BAR is not for everybody, and not everybody is for the BAR. That's just a fact of life.
Yeah.
But we are a very, very open association. We're certainly not an old boys club.
So who is for the BAR?
Those who can satisfy, and that sounds a really glib answer, Rob, and I'm sorry, but those who can satisfy the criteria of membership and the code of practice in full, we'd welcome with open arms.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great for the industry, isn't it, to standardise it and
I think it's probably worth pumping it out there, I feel, because I think, myself included, I'm not too sure what's involved. I don't know. There's nothing out there grabbing me in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's we have in the past. We've gone down the road of buying in leads, and we were talking off air about this, weren't we? Of moving companies and saying, right, let's proactively search. But the rubbish that is generated, and I don't mean the companies, I mean the rubbish in terms of the information that's in the leads that you buy.
Okay, yeah.
It's just completely not worth it.
Yeah.
You'll buy 1,000 leads and you might end up with 2 or 3 active possibilities, which is just not worth it. So what we do, and what I'm really, really happy to do, if anybody wants to know more about us, I'll quite happily come and talk to you.
Yeah.
Quite happily come and talk to you. And I think those conversations are generally better on a one-on-one basis, because we can get into what the BAR might mean for your own business rather than what it means for somebody else's. And we're also always engaged in things like the Movers and Storage Show, because that's our opportunity to get in front of non-BAR member companies.
Yeah.
And we have some great conversations.
Yeah. We're there this year as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a little store, haven't we?
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Yeah.
That'd be
I've
good.
got quite a few friends that are in the BAR,
Yeah.
One of them is Sterling Sinclair. Do you
Oh,
know
yes.
Adam?
Yeah, great guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
get
he-
neck ache when I talk to him.
Yeah, it's so big. Yeah,
He's a
yeah. He's a legend. I speak to him quite often,
He's
and
a good guy.
he keeps
Yeah.
driving me, to
Yeah.
get involved.
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
But he did say that, like you said as well, you get out of it what you put into
you
it.
put
So you
into
have
it.
to go to
Yeah.
these networking events.
Yeah.
You got to mingle.
So with and again, we're a traditional industry, aren't we? But even at that level of area meetings and networking, the areas are moving forward, and most of them have now set up their own WhatsApp groups, and so they're conversing with each other all of the
Yeah.
time on operational issues
Yeah.
in their area.
Yeah.
As in, we've got a porter for Thursday.
Yeah,
Can anybody help me with this? Does anybody know about that? And that's great to see.
It's exactly what
Exactly
happened to
what
us,
we do, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly what
It's
yeah.
brilliant to see where, again, the members are getting something tangible out of the
Without doubt,
relationship locally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other things I haven't talked about, sorry, just while it's in my head because of talking about WhatsApp groups, one of the things I am hugely proud of is that we now have a really, really buoyant, functional young movers group. So from a standing start 6 years ago, that group has now got about 140 members. And
Is that separate?
it's one of the functional groups within the BA. I'll come back to that in a minute if I can. But what's great to see in that group is how active they are, not just with each other, but
Yeah.
within the association and within the industry. And you look at these people and you think, do you know what? Our industry is in really good hands for the future because
Yeah.
there's some incredibly
Yeah.
talented, capable people in that group. It's
Does
brilliant.
Tommy head that?
Yeah. Tommy's involved, he doesn't head
Yeah.
it, but he's involved. Tommy had served as his time on the group's council. So back to your question about is it separate? The BAR is the overarching body, but within that it has a number of different what it calls functional groups,
Yeah.
which are the specialist groups. So the biggest group by far is what we call the National Council. Those are it's made up of those businesses who do their work predominantly in inland domestic moving. Then we have our overseas group. Again, clues in the title. They are specialists in overseas and European moving. We have what has until recently been called the Commercial Moving Group. It's just rebranding itself as the Workplace Change Group because commercial moving isn't just about commercial moving now, it's a whole range of other things. And then we have our Young Movers Group, and each of them has its own council, each of them has its own chair of the council, and the chair of each of those councils has a seat on the main board of directors. So we're properly represented across all areas.
Yeah. So when you say there's 400, is that compiled from, or is it 400 plus 100 and something young members?
No. So the 400 is individual companies
Okay, yeah.
that belong to the BNR.
Okay, yeah.
And they operate out of about 500 sites around the UK. In terms of other statistics, what I can say, because we gather this information every year, so as of January this year, reporting back on 2023, those 400 members between them employed just under 9,500 staff.
Okay.
They did 383,000 moves last year. They've got 4,500 vehicles, just under, and between them they turn over 978 million quid.
Wow.
Stats.
How many removal companies are in the UK? I know there's some Google stats, but what's correct?
Don't know.
No?
That I wish we could really get to the bottom of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Because when you do the searches and so on, it will throw up, hesitate to use the word, but all of the Anyvan stuff
Yeah,
and all of that.
Yeah.
Anybody who provides a storage environment,
Yeah.
anybody
Yeah.
van hire even, it all comes up in those numbers.
Yeah, but what?
What we do know, if we can look at it another way, so on average, usually there's about 1.2 million home moving transactions in the UK each year. Last year it's looking as though it's going to be just over 1 million when the stats all finally work out. But we know from what BAR members tell us that we represent about 30% of that market share.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a whole big market out there
Yeah.
that still
Yeah,
isn't
of course.
part of BAR.
Does that include man and vans or not?
Right, so if we look at the 1.2 million,
Yeah.
there'll be somewhere around 20 to 25% of that which will be delivered by man and van and or self-fulfilled.
Yeah.
Mrs. Smith goes and hires
Yeah.
a van and does it for herself. So there's about 75% of the market share that goes to the removals market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because online, isn't this 9,000?
But when you do a Google
it's-
search, you say it's like
it-
13,000 or something.
But
then-
then you could probably discount 7,000 of those.
Yeah.
Because they're genuinely not.
Of course, yeah.
But they
professional
must get the stat from somewhere, whether it's company's house or the government or something.
But that's where you can go, and you can do your search by, whether it's got the word moving, whether it's got the word storage, but it will throw up all of these other anomalies. So just on those statistics, because this is also really important. I spoke earlier on about the fact that we're constantly lobbying. We spend an awful lot of our time lobbying. We're doing a lot at the moment. We have our own manifesto that gets updated regularly. We've got an election manifesto that's out there at the moment. We liaise not just with the government departments that are in power, but for the last year we've had proper engagement with the shadow cabinet. I met with Keir Starmer's one of his main policy advisors a few weeks ago. We met with the shadow Secretary of State for Transport a month or so ago. So these conversations are going on all the time.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that we use those stats to open the door, because if we're saying we want this, the question that comes back is, well, who are you? And we say, well, we're 400 businesses. Well, you're not really that big, are you? You're not really that important. But if you can start talking about, we employ 9,500 people. We turn over 978 million. We've got 500 sites. We do 383,000 moves.
Yeah, the ears start to...
Because you then think, well, actually, and because we're all VAT registered, because we're all PAYE schemes, we can then say to the Chancellor, and by the way, this is what we're giving to you, Mr. Chancellor, in terms of direct taxations and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we get what we want, but what it does mean is we get listened to.
Yeah.
We're we can be having those conversations.
Yeah. Incredible.
Have you ever chucked anyone out of
I was going to ask
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, I make no apologies for saying this. Our criteria and the code of practice are mandatory.
Okay, yeah.
If we have issues of non-compliance in either of those areas, there is a disciplinary process that we have in place. Everybody has the opportunity to put any non-conformities right, and there is a period of time to do that. But if they do not comply with our rules and or the code, then we will expel them from membership, and we do.
Do you guys ever get involved in disputes? Yeah, fallouts, BAR fallouts? Because
It's a member.
Yeah.
No. Well, I say no. There's a couple of things here. So we have, as part of the code of practice, we also provide the consumer with free access to an independent dispute resolution scheme with the Furniture and Home Improvement Ombudsman. But we will liaise between the member and the consumer to try to get to an outcome before it gets to that point. Okay, that is very much part of what we do. Any commercial arrangement between members, individual members, is a matter for them. We will certainly pick the phone up and say, look, guys, you really need to try and sort this out. But we have no authority to do anything about it unless they are bringing the BAR into disrepute, in which case we do have the disciplinary process that can deal with it. But the fact of one member being 3 days overdue in paying an invoice for another member is not our responsibility and can't be our responsibility.
And if say, I signed up to BAR, which if I pass the vet in, I might do, do I have to use your terms and conditions?
No, but what we do say is that whatever terms and conditions you use can be no less favourable to the consumer than what those that we call our model terms.
Okay.
So we'll provide you with those, and as long as your terms and conditions are at least the equal of those in terms of what the consumer gets, that's fine. And again, that's part of the testing regime. That we
Is
do.
it?
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, I only asked about the dispute thing because I imagine you get quite a lot of BAR members in the same area who are effectively competitors, aren't they?
Yeah, and one of the things that, going back to new businesses joining the BAR, one of the things that it is written in our rules and enshrined in our governance is the fact that no such company can be excluded because of commercial considerations. if Rob was applying to join and you said to me, I don't want him joining because he's a competitor in my area, that's tough.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
As long as Rob's business meets the criteria,
Of course, you
then
can't.
welcome aboard.
You can't
Well, we
single
all
people,
want it-
single
competition
people
is a
out,
good
can
thing.
you?
Yeah, of course. We all want it to be professional and
Yeah.
better. So
Yeah.
you can't say somebody else is not allowed in it because they're round the corner.
No, and
Doesn't make sense.
and that to me is absolutely the biggest challenge that our industry faces. Is we want to be a profession, we want to be a recognised trade, but we don't always behave in that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's regrettable, and I think it's a challenge. I think there is work out there generally enough for everybody, and I know things ain't great at the moment, but that comes and goes in cycles. And if we want the consumer to see us as being professional tradespeople, then we have to behave in that way. We have to present our solutions in that way. We need to be talking in terms of value, not just price.
Yeah.
You know, what's in it for me, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that is something that I get on my soapbox about.
Well, what about Mrs. Smith moving house? Do you think she cares about if someone's in bar or not?
It kind of depends. She should do. She should do.
Because when I moved out, I'd never even.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'd just look for a mover company,
Yeah.
and that's it.
So
Who did you
I'm,
use?
Lambs.
I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to answer your question in a slightly different way. What Mrs. Smith should care about is who's coming into her home. Okay, it's her very, very personal, very private environment. Now, one of the things I get asked a lot by the press, by various media outlets, is what's the cost of an average move? To which my answer is always the same. There's no such thing.
No.
Every single transaction is completely unique. Okay. So back to your question, Mrs. Smith's solution and price needs to be unique to what's happening with Mrs. Smith at the time. And one of the things I think our industry, and by the way, I include BAR members in this, one of the things that I think our industry is not always good at doing is describing what that value is. Now, if we're going to see Mrs. Smith, and again, whether a BAR member or non-BAR member, and we're in the house for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and we go out, right, I'll send you a quote, and a day later the quote comes in, what's she got to measure anything by other than the number at the bottom of the page? That is the only piece of information she's got. So we need to spend the time talking to her about what it means to be a BAR member, about what it means to be a professional trade, about what it means to take the pain away from this thing that she's going to do, because she won't be enjoying it.
No.
You know, so we have to get away from this cycle of just thinking about everything as what's the price, what's the price, what's the price, what's the value,
Yeah.
and that value will be different for different companies.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you need to cost that out according to your own structure. But you know, take the time to talk about what the service is. Take the time to describe it. And something I learned really early in my career in sales, it's always really important to say what you're going to do, but it's almost more important to say what you're not going to do. And make that really, really clear.
Yeah.
I think that process is you need that process. The quotas need to be on point, don't they? The removal industry.
So again, you know, and this is where I do think we make a difference because of our relationship with the code of practice. Those things have to be front and centre for the consumer. So the quotation has to be presented in such a way that it describes and brings to their knowledge, to their attention, what the likely impacts are of any insurance considerations, where additional charges might be incurred and what those circumstances are. You know, so that the consumer can't say, well, I didn't know that because it was hidden away in the terms and conditions. You know, there it is, front and centre. These are the things you need to know. And I've taken the time to talk to you about it.
Yeah, setting them standards saves you a lot of time in the back end.
Yeah, we've got something on iMove where a customer can digitally accept their quote, and then we've got like different tick boxes, so they can confirm they've read certain parts of the terms and conditions, and all of that is automated.
And it just makes absolute sense from everybody's point of view. You know, so there is a clear contract that exists where the services to be provided are properly described and properly understood.
Yeah.
You know, why wouldn't we want to do that? Instead of there's a bit of paper, 600 quid, whatever it might be.
So from a porter, why did you go? What was that transition like from porter to? Well, I suppose you worked your way up, and then did you join bar? What was that?
So porter, I went to being a driver when I was still with Dad, and I also used to do some estimating various bits
Yeah.
there. But we were a really, really small company. And then, as I said, by the end of the 80s, we were falling out. I'd met the lady who's now my wife. She happened to come from Watton in Norfolk, where Abels were, and so
Did she work at Abels?
No. But I just thought, well, something needed to change. I needed to get away from Dad because it wasn't working, so I applied to Abels, got a job as a driver, and I moved to Norfolk. And it was really when I started at Abels that I really started to think about there were these other opportunities.
Yeah.
And that was, and I said on a previous podcast, you know, it was a complete change for me in terms of I could see that there were opportunities, and Abels were and still are a great company for supporting personal development. So I, you know, even as a driver, I was getting engaged in going on courses that taught you how to speak in public and all that kind of stuff. Blimey, what's all that about? And I became quite aware that there were these other opportunities, and if I wanted them, I needed to stick my hand up, and I did. And sometimes it didn't work out, but you know, I went into operations. I spent 2-3 years, I guess, at the ops desk. I didn't particularly enjoy that, I have to say. Sales I really enjoyed, and then towards the end of the 80s and into the early 90s, I'd got really involved in commercial moving. Again, while still at Abels, but that brought me to the attention of Harrow Green in London, and they made me an offer, and I thought, well, I'll go and try that. So moved down to London and got stuck into office and commercial, which, you know, I thought I knew something about, but until I went to London, I had no idea.
So it's a whole different kind of industry, isn't it? Like the way they
do
work.
they only do office and commercial moves then? They don't do anything else?
They had a very small division that did some overseas and domestic, but it was very small.
Are they still going now?
Yeah. But the business was focused. It was built and focused on doing office and commercial.
Right. Okay.
It's a complete, and the London office and commercial moving market is just a completely different economy. It's just microeconomy in its own right. So, but again, that was all part of a learning curve, and it was then, even though I'd been going to BAR area meetings since probably the mid 80s, it was at the end of the 90s that I joined the Commercial Moving Group Council. That's when I really started to get involved in the association.
So from then to now, how long have you actually been in the industry for?
Oh, blimey. So what, 71, 53 years?
53 years.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It is.
Amazing.
Are you proud of yourself?
Am I proud of myself?
I know it's a difficult question. That, but
It's a very difficult question.
you're proud of what you've achieved in all those years?
I'm absolutely proud of what I've achieved for me.
Yeah.
It's for others to say whether I've made a difference to them. But one of the things that I do regularly is you know, that kind of thing, looking at yourself in the mirror, thinking, have you done the best that you could do?
Yeah.
And I'm actually really comfortable with that, in the sense that I've always been, and always will be, I hope, somebody who wants to give 100%. And if that's not good enough, it's not because I haven't tried.
Of course, yeah.
But I'd like to think I've been nearly 10 years in this job, you know.
Yeah.
Somebody would have thrown me out. I thought it wasn't working, but, you know, and again, I think it's really important that listeners understand I am answerable to the board of directors of the BAR.
Yeah.
So I constantly am in dialogue with them. There are various subcommittees that I work with that are looking at our output and what we do. And that is an important part of the measure for me, to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So, you know, I'm answerable, as everybody should be.
So how long has bar been going? Like
so 1900.
1900, wow.
Yeah. It was 1900 it was formed, and in 1914 it became a registered company.
Cool, man.
It was incorporated in 1914.
I forget, honestly, I should know this, but when was the van introduced after the horse and cart? When was that?
In the early 1900s, 1910s, I mean, the horse and cart was around right up until the war, really.
Right.
The Second World War to
Yeah.
an extent.
So in 1900,
But
was it horse and cart?
the Pantechnicon had started to take over. And one of the things we did 4 years, just before COVID, I think it was, Paul Fox, who is Fox Moving and Storage Group, who is a stalwart of the industry, he wrote a book called The Pantechnicon, which is a history of the development of the moving vehicle relative to our industry, and I helped him with that, and we produced it and published it. And all of the proceeds that we get from the sale of that book go to support our charity, the Removers Benevolent Association. But that book talks about the transition from the horse and cart all the way through to the modern day vehicles.
Wow.
And it's and that was also it was 2019 because that also coincided with as I was saying to you earlier, the parade that we did in Stratford Town Centre in 2019, where we had we closed the town centre off and we had horse and cart leading the parade at the front end, and at the back end the modern vehicles of today. So about 30 different vehicles rolling through the town, which was really something to see.
I wonder if there's anyone still stuck in their way using a horse and cart to remove horses.
Well, the answer is yes, not stuck, but there are a number of members who have them, mainly for promotional reasons.
It's a good marketing tool, actually.
But also that they do still use them on occasion in anger.
Do they?
Yeah, for very particular reasons. But
When
there are
someone
wonderful
lowballs the quote, you send the horse and cart. Yeah.
But it's brilliant thing. And I'm a bit of an old diesel head, and I love the old trucks.
Yeah.
So back to working with Dad. The first truck he had was a Thames Trader. And at the age of 13, I used to drive that thing around car parks and goodness knows what.
Did you?
AFL 333B. I remember it well.
You remember the reg?
Yeah.
What about the future of bar? How's that look? The future of bar?
Healthy. You know, the board has its strategies, and one of them is around growth, because inevitably, and we've seen it in this last year, there's consolidation in the market. So businesses get acquired by other businesses, and so we might have the same number of locations around the UK, but we've got one less member because it now belongs to somebody else. So there's always a need to add growth in. And so we're constantly looking at the criteria to evolve it, to encourage others to want to be part of it. We're constantly looking at what our offering is in terms of the support services that we provide, whether it's training, whether it's compliance, whether it's mentoring and guidance, whether that's legal, professional, whatever, all of those things we provide. But what else can we do to add to it? And then also getting that that old chestnut of brand awareness. I think we do a really good job of representing the association in the political and regulatory world, and we are that go-to voice. I think we've got more to do in terms of getting Mrs. Smith to understand who we are and what we're about. But part of that solution is that the members are talking to Mrs. Smith about what being a member of the association means to their business.
One of the big figureheads, I feel, is Jeff Archer.
Yeah, Jeff's a good guy.
I speak to Jeff quite a lot. He's a legend.
Jeff's first two words, whenever you speak to him, now then.
Now then. Even his WhatsApp messages start with now then. Yeah.
Is he from Teesside?
Yeah, he's up in the north. That's the Teesside. And Jeff kind of runs the northern area. Meetings. He's a really, really good guy. And of course, one of the joint winners of Commercial Mover of the Year for
seen that. Is he part of the board as well? Or?
No, he serves on the Commercial Moving Group Council, or what's becoming the Workplace Change Group Council. Yeah. But he's not on the board currently, but he might be one day. Has
your replacement been chosen yet?
No, that's a process that's underway, and this is going to sound horribly round-shouldered, but it's not my job to do that.
Yeah.
So the board is responsible for appointing my successor.
But would there be a handover? Would you have to hand over and guide them?
So the board has appointed a subcommittee to look at that process. That subcommittee has met 3 or 4 times now and is working through its strategies. And I'm working with them. and at some point, whenever he or she comes in to sit at my desk, what's currently my desk, then yes, there will be a handover period.
I'm going to put it out there. I am available.
Well, one of the things that I was going to say is, if anybody is interested, then contact recruitment@bar.co.uk. But don't do it thinking it's an easy ride.
No.
Because it's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's
a hugely satisfying.
just by speaking to yourself, I can just sense your passion and that you're married to the industry. And to be honest, I think you'll be a loss to the industry. I don't know much about it, but by speaking to you for this past hour, you can see that you've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of passion for
I care about
industry.
the industry enormously.
Yeah.
And I care about the BAR enormously. We talk about technology, and I don't mean this in any way negatively. Even in our traditional industry, technology is becoming more and more integrated. And we talk about, the concept of driverless vehicles, robotics, all of that kind of stuff. And inevitably, I think there will be some involvement. But do I see the day in 50 years' time or even 100 years' time where we won't be sending a truck and a couple of men or a couple of girls to move Mrs. Smith? No, I don't.
Never.
No, I don't.
No.
Absolutely not.
No,
I think there is an industry there that we should and could be proud of.
Yeah.
And it's one that's got a heritage, but it's also got a very good future, in my view.
We always like to talk about family on this podcast because it's important. They play a massive role in our life. Is your wife excited about next year?
Yes, very much so. And again, as I said, I met Elaine before I moved to Norfolk, so we've been together 43 years now. And in all of the years we've been together, I've been in this industry, and I've never been at home all of the time. I've always been away a couple of days a week or whatever it is. And one of the things we're absolutely looking forward to is just having that time together all of the time.
Yeah.
She's been an enormous support for me.
How are you going to fill the gaps?
There's
Gardening, golf?
a little bit of gardening. Not golf, no. I am the world's worst golfer, I promise you. But there's stuff that I do want to go back and explore. I talked about getting involved in a really early age, and some of what I did at school suffered as a consequence of that. I've always been really passionate about history, and I did do A-levels at school, and I did get a history A-level, but it wasn't a particularly good one. So maybe go back and look at doing that again. But it's not all down to moving, by the way, because during A-levels I'd also discovered these things called beer and women. Had a bit of impact. But maybe go back and do something like that.
What part of history are you interested in?
Mainly modern history.
Modern history.
Yeah. So sort of Industrial Revolution through First World War up to Second World War really fascinates me.
I loved history.
Yeah.
I was quite good at history in school.
Yeah.
Henry VIII was a good topic for me.
My son-in-law and I, we do fairly regular trips over to France, and we'll go exploring the battlefields and all stuff like that. So, First World War and Second World War. So that kind of stuff just fascinates me.
Have you been to Auschwitz?
No, that was on the agenda for the COVID year actually, and it got shelved. We'd actually booked to go, and it got shelved because of COVID. And for a number of reasons, we haven't gone back to it, but we will.
It's very sad, I've been, it's very
You've
sad.
been, haven't you?
Yeah, it's sad.
It almost doesn't strike me as a holiday. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Krakow's a nice city. Do you know what I mean? To go
Yeah.
around. You obviously stay there and then just do a day tour there. You don't go on holiday to Auschwitz, like.
No.
You wouldn't do that, mate.
The stuff of the battlefields in northern France and so on. I'm not sure it's necessarily a holiday, but because it's stuff I've read about quite a lot, that to actually go and visit those sites, and then to kind of visualise what you've read into the reality of the site, because you can still see the scars and all that kind of stuff. I just find that really fascinating.
Yeah.
So then maybe go and do a bit more of that. But equally, I'm sure I'll still do something, but it won't be travelling the length and breadth of the UK.
Yeah.
It will be, and it won't be 5 days a week, 6 days a week.
You got children?
Yeah, I've got 2 daughters. We've got 2 daughters, both of whom are grown, of course, and long since left the nest rather. Might be the nest. Emily, our oldest daughter, lives in Norwich with Jo, her partner. and Becky, our youngest daughter, and her husband Jason, and our granddaughter, the lovely Ivy, live in Shrewsbury.
Nice. Yeah.
Did any of them dip into the removals world?
Becky, my youngest daughter, having done really well at school, did brilliantly at school through her GCSEs, got some great results, said, I don't want to do school anymore, I'm going to come and work for you. I thought, oh, right, okay. So I wasn't sure that was a great idea, but she did. She came, not worked directly for me, but she worked in the business for a period of time. But I think fairly quickly worked out that that really wasn't what she wanted to do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And she went on ultimately and went to agricultural college, which is where she met her husband. They both qualified with honours and are now gamekeepers on an estate up in Shropshire.
Amazing.
So,
Different life altogether.
So kicking it back to like the removal industry, what about women in the removal industry? Because you never ever see any removal women.
There are more.
There's a few.
Is there
not
more
many.
and more?
You know, we've certainly seen, and it's great to see, more women getting involved in fairly senior roles, you know, managerial roles, senior managerial roles. And actually, referring back to our Young Movers group, there is a predominance of women in that group.
Okay.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And the council, the Young Movers Council, is made up almost entirely of women. It's brilliant to see. And they're really, really clever, intelligent, talented people. We are seeing more women, more ladies in operational roles, but it does still present some challenges. So back to nights out, for example, you know,
Yeah.
how are you dealing with that? It's kind of
Yeah.
crazy, it's kind of silly, but it is a consideration. But way back in the 80s, in the mid-80s, Abels was employing lady packers at that time.
Yeah.
And we were very often out with you as part of
Yeah.
what we used to do these really long involved jobs, and they would very often be part of the crew, very often. So it's great to see that there are more, and to this day I think Abels has lady porters and packers on its crew.
Yeah. It's funny because, yeah, you are right. Predominantly it's males
Yeah.
operational,
Yeah,
but behind the scenes you need women because they oil those cogs better than we can.
attention to detail,
Yeah.
you know, and approach, they are absolutely first rate. But
Yeah.
they're also, you know, such well, again, I'll use the word, such intelligent, talented people
Yeah.
Yeah.
who just bring a different concept
Yeah.
and a different thought process, which is great to see.
Is there any all women removal companies?
Yeah, there are, and I should remember the name, and I can't.
I'm
Not as
sure
BAR
I've come
members,
across
but-
one.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
but I
There's
can't
one
remember
local
it.
to here.
Yeah.
They're called the Three Sisters.
Oh, are they? Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's what they're called. But I've actually bumped into them before on a move, and they use men. But it's ran by, it was started by.
It's like a marketing.
Yeah.
To my mind, and I think personally, it's great that more women are getting involved. I think ultimately it's about the service, it's about the value. So whether it's a woman delivering it or a man delivering it, it shouldn't really matter. It's about what we're doing and doing
absolutely.
it properly.
Yeah.
That's
Do
great.
you like football?
For my sins, I'm a Norwich City fan.
Yeah.
You know, because we lived in Norfolk for years and I got quite fond of Norwich. Football isn't my first love. My first love was rugby. I always was and always will be.
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose I ought to confess that I can't watch the England games at the moment.
Yeah,
It's
that's why I asked.
nonsense.
Yeah.
You know, I always thought, what do I know about football? What do I know about sport? But I always thought to win a game, you had to play forward and put the ball in.
Yeah,
the net.
it's.
But you know, rugby I think is evolved into a phenomenal game.
Did you watch England last night by any chance?
No, I
No.
didn't.
You're just not into it then?
No, not. I kept an eye on the score, just flipping through the BBC website, but no.
It
I thought I can't
tense,
get
wasn't it?
excited about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I lost my voice actually. It was awful all the way through, and then like Bellingham obviously scored an opening kick, and it was like.
and of course, you know, I'm an Englishman.
Of course,
in
yeah.
everything, but
Yeah.
you just
By
think
the-
part of it is about being entertained, and I just
Yeah.
don't find that.
Yeah, this is. it's
By
quite
the time this
negative.
podcast is out, the Euros will be
It'll
over.
be done, yeah.
So any predictions?
Oh, it's coming on.
He's coming home. You reckon?
Yeah.
We're going
I
to
do,
win
yeah,
it.
yeah. Benningham's a winner. Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
I mean, you know, the way the draws worked out, they're going to avoid, even if they get to the final,
Yeah.
they're going to avoid so many of the teams that probably could or should.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Well,
So
Switzerland
Spain-
next, isn't it? And they look real strong.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think we're going to get knocked out to Switzerland, unfortunately.
Okay.
I don't know who it was on the news this morning coming down, but somebody asked him that question. He said, "Oh, we're going to win it. We've already beaten Switzerland." And I thought, "I'm not sure, mate."
You know, I'm going to edit this to see.
Have you got anything else that you wanted to express or speak about?
Listen, I've really enjoyed just coming along and having a
it's
chat.
been a
And I hope
pleasure,
some of it is of some interest to
This is super valuable, trust me, really, really valuable. And whilst you've been talking, I've been thinking in my head, you're a busy guy, so we're honoured that you've come here today for us.
But part of my job, a fairly significant part of my job, is making the BAR accessible and available.
Yeah.
And something like this is part of that. You know, we're not an old boys club.
Yeah.
We really are. We'll embrace anything that can meet with our criteria.
And I love that. Yeah, I love that. I love
And
that
you've done that
took
wonderfully
your time
today.
to come down. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've enjoyed it.
Thanks for coming on and have a nice last year at work and enjoy retirement.
Yes.
He's coming home.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Cheers, Ian.
Thank you, guys.